Welcome. In this tutorial, we are going to look at how to do random object generation, specifically how to kind of create an endless randomly generating room, right? So you can kind of see how, right, I come up here, I'm in this room, each one of these walls with the entry is being randomly generated, right? So I basically have two walls here. I have one, there's two choices for each wall. There's a solid wall, a wall with a hole in it, right? And so when you go through the wall with the hole in it, right, it pops over and generates a new wall. Now, this isn't working quite like we're going to want it to in the end, but this is, where I got to at this point, and I need to start making this tutorial. So here we go. So if you're in the class, or if you've looked at the earlier tutorial, we're going to start with the top-down mode for doing this. So, or with the top-down setup. So if you've made this already, fantastic. If you haven't, really, you just need a player that you can move right in the X and Y directions around the space that has a collider attached to it, and that's all you really need. To get started. We don't need any of these other objects. And in fact, just to make things easier, let's go ahead and clear up all of those objects. So I'm just going to go ahead and select these checkered objects and this anim 3. I'm going to get rid of all of those. So all we should have is just your player, which in my case is Bob. And let's get started. So first, what we need to do is we need to create our different walls, right? And so this is going to take a little bit of time, and we're going to need to create a parent object called the room that we're going to be essentially placing those walls in. So, there's a couple different ways that we could do this, but we're going to try and do it with the most fluid in terms of, rather than having a bunch of pre-made rooms that we're randomly choosing between, we are going to just generate the walls in each room randomly. So all I've got in here is scene variables, which we haven't populated yet, the main camera, and Bobby. And I'm going to go ahead and just save this as a top down wall random room. Okay, so this will be called top down random room. And the first thing we need to do is we need to create our assets that we're going to use in this scene. So what we're going to do is let's start by creating our wall types. And so to do that, we're going to create an empty object. And I'm going to call this object north wall and dash no entry. Okay, and then I'm going to copy and paste that. And with this one, I'm going to rename it. It'll be north wall entry. And then we're going to go ahead and we can actually hold down Shift, select both of these, copy them, paste them, and then just adjust our names accordingly, right? This one, because we're also going to need, we're just going to go and let's go ahead and make east wall, no entry, and then we will make west or east wall entry. Because what we can do is once we get the assets put in, once we get the other child objects put in here, then the east and the west wall, we can essentially just duplicate that and make a minor change. And the north wall, we can turn into a south wall, right? So I'm going to zoom out, and you'll notice that because I had my camera in my scene all the way over here, this is like way off center. So let's hold down Shift and select all the things that we just created. And we are going to come up to our transform, and we're just going to click reset. And then we're going to move our view back so that it's centered over this, right? And so what we want is we're going to want to use our camera as the bounds for our room. And one of the things we can do to change how big this, right, how much is seen by the camera, we can select our camera, and rather than like moving it in or out in the Z direction, we can adjust this size. So the size currently is 7, which is what I want. But we can, you could make that like, I think 5 is the default size. but 7 is what we're interested in doing for this. And what that means is it is 7 units from the center of the view to the bottom edge or the top edge, right? And it's some variation on that based on the on the scale here, right? So, you know, if I did 16:9 aspect ratio, it should look exactly the same. That's what this QHD, I don't know why it was deciding to do like pretty high resolution, but whatever. So I'm going to say it's 16:9 is what we want that aspect ratio to be. Okay, so let's go ahead and start creating our child object. So for the north wall with no entry, what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to come up here and we're going to go 2D object, sprites, square. And then our square is currently offset. Let's just go ahead and reset that position. And then let's use our rect tool, and we're going to zoom in so we can actually see this. And I'm going to make this frame smaller so that I can actually see the bounds of my window here. And I'm going to hold down, I'm going to click and drag, but I'm going to hold down the Option while I do that. And that will allow me to drag this out. If I click Option first, it's going to be a little bit problematic because, right, it's going to turn this into a hand. So you just want to make sure you set that at the right time. So I've got this square set, right? It's about the right width. It's 24.95. And actually, if we were to do the math, and if you remember how to, you know, figure out a ratio, like if you convert a ratio like 9/16 to, we know this is 7 over blank. If we do that math, it ends up that this total width over here is actually 24.88 or 24.889 if you want to be more precise. So let's say it's 24.889, so we get it all the way out to the bounds there. And then we want to position this at 7 in the Y, right? We want this to straddle the edge of our bounds. What this means is that, right, we're not going to get a little gap on the side if we accidentally don't have this quite right. And then also it just sort of maximizes the amount of space we have within our screen. All right, so I've got this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to undo that step. Sorry. I'm going to make this a child of the north wall, no entry. All right, so I want to hover that in there, make it a child. I'm just going to call it wall, surprisingly enough. And then once it's in there, let's go ahead and set that Y to 7. Okay, so I've done this one. So let's go ahead and do our east wall, no entry, and then we will do the next one. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to say 2D object, sprite, square. Let's go ahead and make this one a child of that east wall, no entry to begin with. So we don't have to do it later. Let's reset its position. And then let's go ahead and say, okay, so north, right, north, east, south, and west, right? So we're going to do this wall. So let's go ahead and start dragging this, hold down Option, and let's bring this out so it's actually 14 units in length, right? We can actually just come over here and just say 14. And then we are going to want this to be at, right, because this is 0, and so we actually need it to be 12.44 is, and we could say 444, you know, if we're at the point of 1,000th of a unit, it's not going to be that big of an issue for us. We might want to make this a little bit longer eventually, but we'll talk about that in a second. So we have some overlap there. Okay, so we've got this one set. Great. And let's go ahead and call this wall as well. And we could even call this east wall if we wanted to, and we could call this north wall. It may be nice to have these be named independently for future things that you'd want to do in the scene. Okay, so we've got the ones with no entries. Let's go ahead and turn the visibility of these objects off. And in fact, it's probably easier just to do this here. Oops, I was going to go ahead and actually select the entire north wall object here. Okay, let's hide that. This one, let's hide that. Okay, so now let's do our north wall with an entry. So what we're going to do is, again, we need to create a square. And we are going to go ahead and let's just say we want this to be about a third the size. Like the door doesn't need to be all that big, but let's go ahead and center this to start with. And then we are going to, let's go ahead and drop it into our north wall entry. And we can call this wall segment or something like that. I don't know. And it could be north wall segment. Okay, so we've got our north wall segment. So, let's go ahead and, stretch this out. Let's see here. This total length is 24.88. So a third of that would be 8, point, I don't know, 22 something. It doesn't really matter. Let's just say 8.22. Let's go ahead and set the Y position of this to 7. And then the X position of this, let's just say we're going to go all the way to the edge of the frame here. So we'll say 8.38. Sure, that sounds good. And maybe we want these to be a little longer. Let's go ahead and let's just make this 10. It's going to be so much easier for us a little bit down the line. And I'm just going to drag this back over a touch. Okay. And then to 7.5. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and paste this. So I have north wall segment 1, which I'm just going to leave it named that. And then I'm going to say I want the X to be, let's just say negative 7.5. There we go. That should be enough space for Bob to get out, which is what we want. And you'll see it's overlapping a little bit here, right? It's not totally perfect, but it'll do for this example. Okay, so we've got our segments. And now what we need is we need to have another empty object here that will be our collider. Okay, so we've got our, let's see here. So we've got these set. So let's go ahead and we have our object here and we're going to say create empty child, right? I have my north wall entry selected, so I can just make this a child immediately. And I'm going to go ahead and call this, we'll just call it doorway. Or we could call it entry because that's what we've been calling everything. Okay. So we've got our entry, we've got north wall segments, and we're ready to start going. So this entry is going to need a collider. In fact, we could select all 3 of these objects. Oh, and one last thing, this entry is currently at 0, 0, 0. We are going to want to make sure that this is centered at 7 in the Y, right? It needs to be up here. You can see when if I have an empty object, all I get is this little circle. But if I was to click on my axes over here on my move tool, you'll see that that's the center of my object now. So let's go ahead and select all 3 of these. I'm going to say add component. And we're going to go down to physics 2D, and we're just going to say box collider 2D. So the 2 walls, the box colliders, are going to be exactly where we want them to be. In the entry, we're going to need to make an adjustment. So let's go ahead and click on our edit collider button. And we just want to make sure that this collider, and again, once I start clicking, I can hold down Option. We just want to make sure this collider more or less meets the walls. It doesn't have to touch the walls, but we want it to meet the walls. Okay, and then what we need to do is when Bob comes through here, we need to know he's going through the north entry, right, rather than the east, west, or south entry. And so we're going to need to create some tags. Now, I've already created all of these tags, but go ahead and create an east, west, north, south, and north-south tag. And we may need entry and wall as well, but start with all of these tags, and we're just going to go ahead and I'm going to choose this tag north for my entry, right? Because this is the north wall. Okay, so once we've done that, we've got both of our north walls ready to roll. So let's go ahead and do our east wall entry. So with the east wall entry, again, we're going to do the same steps. We're going to say 2D, sprites, square, and first reset all those positions. Then we are going to want the X to be 12.44, and we could say 444 if we really want to. And then we're going to need to use our rect transform, and we can scale this in the Y. I know that it's actually going to need to be 14 units long to go from top to bottom, so I'm just going to type 14 in there. And oh, this is the entry. I don't want it to be 14 units long. I actually want it to be about a third of 14, which is going to be, 4.5 or something like that. Oops, not 144. Let's try that again. 4.5. Okay, so that's probably about that. I'm going to call this my wall segment, or my east wall segment. Okay, and so now we are going to pull this down, hold down Shift while we do it, and I'm just going to more or less align it with that bottom edge. Fantastic. That is negative 4.8. So now I'm going to go ahead and make this a child of my east wall entry, since I forgot to do that. Then I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste. Oops. I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that segment. And I'll just drag this up. I'll hold down Shift so it stays aligned with the edge. And I'll come up here until it's more or less at the top. Perfect. Okay, and now that I've done those two, I'm going to select my east wall entry again, and I'm just going to say create empty child, and I'm going to call this east entry as the name of this object, and then I will select all three of these things. Oh, and I forgot, let's select east entry, and we are going to go ahead and set our X position of this east entry to 12.444. And then I'm going to go ahead and select all three of these. And I'm going to say add component, and I'm going to go to physics 2D, box collider, right? So my two of my box colliders should be good. And then with my east entry, I just need to edit my collider. I just need to edit my collider until it is the right width. Right, and you can see it looks like I'm a little bit off with my wall up here. It doesn't really matter. If I want to nudge that wall up some, I can. I could move it up just like, a hair of a unit. It's at 4.7. If I make it 4.8, then when I select my entry, that should be more even, and now I could go ahead and hold down Option and just make this a little bit bigger. Okay. All right, so I've got my east wall, my east entry done, and my north entry done, and my east wall and my so what I need to do now is just duplicate these. Now, the reason that we're doing all of this where we're making sure that when I select my north wall entry object, you'll note that my position is 0 and 0, right? It's dead set in the middle, even though all of my assets are up here. What this does is this makes the math that we need to do when we generate these objects and generate these rooms so much easier, right? Rather than having to generate it and position it, we can just use the camera's position, right? Because the camera is the center of the screen, and we can just say, position it here, and it's going to draw it every single time at the edge, at the boundaries of our frame, which is exactly what we want to do, right? And so part of this is all a big part of doing this well and cleanly is planning. Okay, so I've got my north wall entry. Let's go ahead and I'm actually going to turn on my other walls as well. So let's say we have our north wall, no entry. So I'm going to go ahead and copy that and paste it. And I'm going to rename this south wall, no entry. And then I'm going to open up this object. I might as well just rename this to south wall again. And then what I need to do, and I forgot to tag this, we'll do that in a second. But what I need to do is I need to come down here and I don't have a collider on these either, so I should probably go ahead and add a collider to this. Things I forget. So yes, so let's go ahead and add a box collider, make sure, because otherwise we're just going to walk right through that wall. So I've got my south wall, and the other thing is, right, currently it's at 7, but I want this to be at -7, so it's on the south of the frame, right, the bottom of the frame. So my south wall should be good to go. My south wall, no entry. So let's say north wall, no entry. I'm actually going to go ahead and select this object and add a box collider right now before I forget. So let's go to Physics 2D and Box Collider 2D. Okay, so now the north wall is actually ready. So let's do our north wall with an entry. And I'm actually going to go ahead and turn off my south wall again, so I can see this new wall generate and make sure everything's in the right place and I'm not doing anything wrong. So north wall entry, I'm going to copy, I'm going to paste that. I'm going to rename this south wall entry, delete that 1. And now I'm going to go ahead and open this up so I can see my different objects here. I'm going to select all 3 of them, and I'm going to set the Y to -7. Okay, and then now the last thing I need to do is this entry, right, is currently tagged north. I need to tag that south. Okay, so now let's go to our east wall entry, since it is what is next. And I'm going to go ahead and select this, and I'm going to go ahead and tag this as east. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and select my east wall entry. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to paste it. And I'm going to rename the one that I just pasted to west wall entry. Oops. And I'm going to select that west wall entry object. I'm going to open it up, scroll down in my hierarchy, maybe make my variables a little smaller. And you'll see I have all of these things that I should probably be renaming. But step 1 is going to be to hold down Shift, select all 3 of those, and just make this -12.44 as my position. And then once I've done that, I'm going to select the east entry, and I'm going to change this to west. And then I'm also going to change the name so I don't get confused if I'm looking at these things later in my hierarchy. So that's the west entry, and these are both east wall segments. I can probably just, type in west wall segment, and that should rename both of them the same, which is totally fine, right? We're really just focused on making sure that our entries are right. So this is, let's go ahead and make this the south entry while we're at it, and select both of these and just say south wall segment. Again, most of this is just for our benefit, but the tagging is so we can actually make use of all this stuff that we're creating. So, okay, so we've got the south wall entry, west wall entry, east wall entry, and north wall entry. So we've got all of our assets ready to go. Fantastic. So let's go ahead and see what we can do. Let's go ahead and select these ones that are unchecked and check them. Okay. Right, so now I should have everything. What am I missing? Let's look. We have north wall entry, east wall, no entry. Oh, sorry. We have north wall, no entry, north wall entry, east wall, no entry, east wall entry, south wall, no entry, south wall entry. So we're missing the west wall, no entry. So let's go ahead and take our east wall, no entry, and let's copy that and paste it. And let's just make these little updates that we need to do. So, right, we're just going to rename it there. And then we will flip this down, select our east wall, say this should be our west wall. And then we just need to put a negative in front of that 12.444. Right, okay. So now we have all of our wall options, right? And what we're going to be doing is we'll be generating, a set of these 4 walls where we're going to want to make sure there's at least one exit to any room we create. And then we also are going to, there's a couple other things we'll need to consider, right? We're going to need to be able to figure out, like if we walk out the east wall, then we're going to need to have an entry in the west wall of the next room that we create, right? So we're going to need to be tracking whatever entry we left so we can draw that entry in whatever, wherever it needs to go. Okay. So this is some of the setup. Now what we need to do is we need to take these and we need to make these, we need to put these in a prefabs folder because we're going to be instantiating these, right? We're going to be generating these on the fly as our character goes through the different entries. So let's go ahead and go to our project pane. If you do not have a prefabs folder already, and you'll note that I already have a bunch of stuff here, I'm going to create a new folder to put these existing walls in. So I'm just going to say folder, old walls. Let me get these put away, and then we will do this next step. Okay, so I've put those in there, right? So if you don't have a prefabs folder, you can just select your assets, or you can click on the plus sign and you can just say folder, and then you want it to be with a capital F in the middle. So prefabs, otherwise Unity will have a really hard time finding it. You can define custom folders, but it's so much easier just to have it in the prefabs folder. Okay, so I'm going to select all of these objects. I'm going to drag them down in here. Oh, and of course it's not going to let me do that. Okay, so this is a one at a time kind of thing. So let's go north wall entry, north wall no entry. All right, set east wall no entry, and just keep doing this. This is really exciting. Okay, so we've got all of our walls in our prefabs. So let's go ahead and delete all of our existing walls as they stand now. So I'm just going to right click, I'm going to say delete. Okay, so because we don't need those in the scene right now, we're going to be generating these on the fly at the start of the game. And so the very first thing we need to do is we're going to need to create, let's go ahead and create an empty object. And we're just going to call this game controller or something like that, right? Or manager would probably be great. Right, so game manager. And this game manager, all it's going to have on it is first we're going to reset it to 0. And we're going to we'll eventually be adding a bolt script to this in order to kind of fire things off at the beginning and deal with some of the other work that we're going to be doing, including creating new rooms. Now, this is the next part that we have to figure out is how do we want to create rooms, and how can we get rid of objects in the process? Okay, so we've created this empty game manager object that's going to house a flow machine that's going to do a lot of the room generation code. But there's some other stuff that we need to do as well. So first, let's go ahead and we have our game manager. Let's actually go ahead and add component, bolt, flow machine, and let's say a new macro. And we are going to call this game manager as well. You could also call it room generator or something like that. But this potentially, right, would also be housing like scorekeeping and a bunch of other elements as well. So let's go ahead and save this as game manager. And we don't need to make any edits to the graph right now. We just want to have it set there. And then we need to go to our project tab and go to our prefabs because we need scripts on some of these. Now, in the past, there's a choice here. Do we want the collision detection to be happening on the player object, or do we want the collision detection to be happening on these walls? Now, one of the nice things is with a couple steps, we can use the same macro on all 4 of these walls and essentially eliminate a lot of the complexity of our resulting graphs if we can take care of as much as we can possibly take care of on each of these different components. So I'm going to select all the walls that have an entry. So I'm just holding down Command and clicking, or Control if you're in Windows and clicking to select these 4 objects without selecting anything between them. And I'm going to go ahead, and you'll note that I've already got a flow machine on mine, right? But so all you'll need to do is click Add Component, go down to Bolt and Flow Machine. And then you'll note it says multi-object editing not supported. That's fine. So what we're going to do is now we're going to go to our east wall, and we're going to click Open Prefab. And then we will go ahead and click, we're going to create a new macro, and we're going to call this entry collider graph or something like that. And let's go ahead and put this in our scripts and save. Okay, and let's go ahead and edit our graph. So what we need is, we don't need, right, either of these 2 objects here, right? We're going to go ahead and delete both of those. All we need right now is a collision detection. So we're going to say on CO, and it's on collision, and we're going to say on collision stay 2D. Because when I was testing this, what happens sometimes is the on collision enter, sometimes it would register a couple bumps and it would do all sorts of crazy things. So we're going to say on collision stay. So it's like we know we're going through the doorway and we haven't just brushed against it. Because sometimes, you know, your character might touch it, but you want to really make sure that we're there to stay. So we're going to say on collision stay 2D. And then collider, right? We're going to want to get the game object compare tag. And right, we're going to want, we'll double check and make sure Bobby is tagged player, but it's capital player as the tag we want to check, right? So if the player hits the door, then we are going to need to do something. And so, right, so if this is true, then we're going to go to a branch. And we are going to say, all right, so if this is true, then what do we want to do? What we want to do is, this is going to be similar to moving between states in a state machine, right? We're going to create a custom event, but we're actually going to be passing it we're going to be passing an argument through as well, right? Because we want to know what door our player has hit. And so, so we're only going to do the true branch on this. Let's go ahead and we don't need to connect this to the compare tag, right? We can just go to the branching unit and this should work. And so we've got this collision. We're saying, okay, branch is true. And what we want to do is right click and say custom. And we want to trigger a custom event, right? And so we're going to drop this in here. We're going to then say, we'll just call it entry collide, something like that. And the arguments we want out of this, we're going to want to add one argument in here. And that argument is going to be the tag of our collider, right? Not of the player, but of the actual doorway object, right? And so to get that, I'm just going to right click and I'm just going to say game object dot tag. And we just want to get our tag and itself, right? That's the object that we want. So we're just going to feed this into arg0 and we will be getting our tag out. Okay. So, right, so this collision event is going to, if it's the player, it should trigger this custom event that we called entry collide, and it's going to be sending out whatever the tag is for this entry, right? And so we currently just have this on the east wall, but let's go ahead and put this on all the walls that have an entry. So we're going to go back to our project, and we've done east wall. I'm going to click on north wall, and I should be able to actually hold down Command and select north, south, east, west. Oh no, it won't work. Too bad. Okay, so I'm going to select the north wall. I don't have to open the prefab. I should just be able to go in here and come down here and say entry collider graph on the north. And the south wall, do the same thing, entry collider graph. And then the west wall with a hole in it, entry collider graph. Okay, so now when the player hits this, it should trigger some event to occur, right? This custom event that we created. Now, we do have to reference that custom event, right, in our main object. So let's go ahead and pop back out of these. And let's select our player, and Bobby is currently untagged. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to player so that when he hits one of these objects, we know that he's hit one of those objects. Okay, so we've got those colliders set. Now, to start with, you know, at this point, right, if it's a collider, you cannot pass through that collider. And so there's some other things we're going to want to potentially do to that collider once Bobby hits them. And what we may do is maybe and right now we have it on collision enter, and we'll be making some changes to those scripts as we go forward, but this will work for the time being. Okay, so we've got our game manager. And we've got this game manager graph. So let's go ahead and click edit graph. And one of the things that we need to do is step one, right, at the beginning of this game, right, or whatever, we need to, we actually need to generate the walls as the very first thing that we do. And then once we've generated those walls once, we're going to need to, you know, be able to enclose those all in something. So first, what we want to do is we want to generate a room, right, which is going to be an empty object that's going to house all of the walls. And I believe this will make destroying everything a lot easier when we're done using them. It's a problem that I had when I was working on this, and we'll see if this works well or not, and I might be re-recording this tutorial several times. Okay, so with the start event, the first thing we're going to do is we want to create a new game object. So if we just type in new game, right, new game object, and we can actually give the new game object a name, and you can actually even add components to it, but we're just going to say new game object, and let's give it a name, and let's just call it room for now. Eventually we could potentially make it so we actually can number these rooms, and that could be something that could be used as a count for how many rooms we've moved through. But so we're going to create this new game object, step one, right? And then what we want to do is then we're going to want to generate all of these walls as children of this object that we've created. So let's go ahead and start that process. Now, how are we going to generate these? Well, first, we're going to need to use, right, the random functions to choose which walls to apply. But we're going to have to do this 4 times, and we have 2 choices for each one, and we need to be able to go in and access those 2 choices and pull up whichever one, you know, the random variable has chosen. So let's focus on just generating one random wall to start with, and then we will build that out to all 4. And so we're going to start with the north wall. Now, to do this, the simplest way for us to make this choice is to create something called a list that's going to be able to hold the north wall and the south wall object at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create, I'm going to make this a scene level variable. Let's make it an object variable. And I'm going to say north wall list. I'm going to open this up. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to make these, this is going to be a list. So I need to type in list, and then it's an opening caret. And if I type in GAME, game object, that's the type of list we want to create. And we're going to want to have 2 values in there. And when I have these 2 values, what I need to do is I need to go to my assets. So maybe what I'll do is I'll come down here, right? So I want north wall entry. And so what I'm doing is, right, I still have game manager selected, and I click drag. If I click on these, right, it's just going to select this, and my object variables are going to go away. So I click drag to do north wall, and with all of these, we want the entry to be the first object and the solid wall to be the second. So let's just go ahead and grab north wall entry, and then drag in the north wall no entry. Okay, so we've got this north wall list, and it has these 2 objects in it. And what we can do is now we can use a numerical value 0 or 1 to choose between these two. And so let's go ahead and, right, this is something we're going to want to get. So I'm going to go ahead and click in my graph and then pull this get north wall list over. Now, so we've got this list, and what's nice about having a list with just 2 items in it, because we only have 2 options. Now, if you wanted more options, we could do this a little bit differently, but we're just going to use 2 options. And so we're going to have a random number generator. So let's say add unit. We're going to say random dot range, and right, there's these 2 options here. And so one is with an int, and so we're going to select that. And what random range is going to do, what's nice about this is we actually can just use our index. So we're going to say the min inclusive, right, is 0. So that means 0 is a possibility. And with lists, the numbering of the items starts at 0. So it's 0 and this is 1, right? And then max exclusive means basically what's the total number of items in the list. Now, what we can do to be really smart and make this future-proof, if we wanted to say add 2 more possibilities in here, is we can go ahead and from our list, we can go to collections here. We can say, and we can say count items, right? And so what that's going to do is it's going to give us that total number. So it would be 2, right? And so max exclusive, we can just feed this right into max exclusive. And so what that means is, right, it's going to choose a 0 or a 1. It will never choose 2. But that gives us the 2, right? 0 and 1 are the 2 choices we want. So now we have this random range, and it's going to shoot out one of these options when we're ready to go. So we've created our new game object, right? And we have the room created. We've got our list. We are figuring out which wall to choose. And then what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to instantiate that wall as a child of our room game object. So I'm going to right click, I'm going to click add unit, I'm going to type instant i8, and what I want is original and parent. I believe that should be all we need. So the original is going to be the output of this. However, it's not going to be just, right, we can't just have this number coming out of here. What we need to do is we need to take and get the item at that index. So I'm going to click over here. I'm going to click over here. I'm going to go to collections, and I'm going to say lists, and I'm going to say get list item. And then the index that I need to get is this value here. And now what I want to do is I want to come over here, and this needs to be the original, right? This is original is just means like what's the object you're going to instantiate. What's the prefab that's going to create that instantiation. And then I need to go to my game object here, and I need to plug this into my parent field, right? Because that's what I want to be the parent. So let's go ahead and run this and see what we get. Now note, right, if we run into the collider, nothing's going to happen right now because we don't have that set up. Now, something else is going wrong here. Oh, I forgot to complete my flow over to instantiate. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. Okay, so it has generated the wall with the hole in it. Now, the fun thing about this is we could, every time I do this, you know, there's a chance that every single time I click play, it's going to instantiate the same wall. But let's see. Okay, so I've got 2. Let's see if this one does something different. Okay, 3 times. Let's see if we can go ahead while this is still playing. I'm just going to add an on key, and we will be essentially instantiating these on top of each other, and maybe not the space. Who cares? I'm just going to do the space, and I'll link this down here, right? So now, and if I click in my game window, there we go. I hit it once and I got a solid wall, right? So it's definitely working. And you can see that I've got these rooms, And so each time a room is generating, right now it's just generating one wall. So I've got this one that's north wall with an entry and one room that's north wall with no entry. So this is working exactly as we expected it to work. Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. And I'm going to go ahead and delete this. We don't need that, although we might use that for testing later. Now, so we're doing one wall and it's working. So let's go ahead and double click to open this up, because what we're going to do is, I know from experience, this graph is going to get to be a nightmare, and we're going to want to be using some super units in order to just keep things organized. And the other thing is, rather than instantiating these objects in each one of these steps, it might be a lot cleaner to instantiate these, to add all of these items to a list and then instantiate the list in a for loop. So let's go ahead and go through and do the setup we need to do the other walls. So to start with, right, if I select this object variable, right, I've got my north wall list with my north entry and south entry. So let's go ahead and let's go ahead and do these in order. So north, east, south, and west, right? We're going to do them in clockwise order. So we're going to say east wall list. And let's go ahead and make this a list and open caret game object. Perfect. And we're going to just say plus plus. And I'm not going to add these yet. We're just going to create the list and then we'll go back and add them. So
now I'm going to say this should be the south wall list. I'm going to hit plus. I'm going to go to list open caret game, get my game object, and I'm going to say plus plus. And then I'm going to say west wall list and add this and say, oh, I always forget, list open caret game and game object, and then plus and plus.
Okay, so I've done that. So let's go ahead and we can actually, even before we populate these with objects, we can go ahead and pull all of these into our graph, because these are objects that we're going to need, right, in each state. Okay, so so we're going to have our 4 objects here, but we're going to be doing these steps right here over and over and over again. So let's go ahead and select these 3, copy them, and then I'm going to right click. I'm going to say add unit. I'm going to type in super unit. I'm going to double click on my super unit. I'm going to go ahead and paste this in here. And so obviously with my input, I'm going to need the list. So let's go ahead and we'll select our input and our control inputs. We do need a flow in order to have this random fire off. So let's go control inputs, and we're going to say it's going to call it flow in. And then we will have our value inputs here. And this value input, I'm going to add one. The key will be list. And the type is also going to be a list open caret game, right? So we want the game object list, right? We're pretty specific in what we want. So then what we can do is we can connect this to here, connect to this to here, and then what we want to get out is the item, right, of our list. And we probably want the flow out as well. So let's go ahead and create a flow out. And I'm going to shrink this variables field. There we go. And value outputs. I'm going to hit plus. I'm going to say key. This will be, we'll just call it wall. And we are going to go down, and this should be a game object is what we're expecting. So we can come in here. We can connect this to the wall, and we can create this flow here. Now you'll note that this list, right, I need to have this connected in one more place, which is over here. And that should then create this super unit. Now that I've got this super unit, let's go ahead and go back to our game manager and let's title it so we actually know what this is doing, right? Choose wall, right? That's basically what we're doing, right? We're choosing the walls. And so let's leave this alone, right? We're going to leave that one as the default, just so we can make sure that if this is that this will work. So first I'm going to put my list in here. Now I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste this choose wall a couple more times. I don't know if I'll need the update function at all for this, but we'll see. All right, so choose wall, choose wall, choose wall. So I'm going to go list and list. And then we'll need the flow. So at this point, right, we're instantiating this object. But really what we probably want to do is we want to create a list, or add a bunch of items to a list. And so so let's go ahead and to start with, I'm just actually going to have this flow run through all of these. So all 4 walls get chosen. And then let's go ahead and we're going to right click. We're going to say add unit. And we're just going to say, and actually we'll go to collections. And we're going to say lists. And one of the things we can do is we can create a list. So let's go ahead and click create lists. And we know we want 4 elements. So let's go ahead and add 4 elements to this list, because there's going to be 4 game objects that end up getting put in here. Now, right now, this list kind of is going to accept anything that we give it, which is fine. So let's go ahead and say, all right, so let's say north is 0, right? And then this next wall, 1, 2, and 3. And this is the convention that we're going to, right, be using, is we're going to be creating this list, right? And so let's go ahead and we want to save this list as a variable as well. So, and let's go ahead and make this, we'll make this a scene level. Actually, no, the game manager is going to do all of this. Let's keep it a game level. So I'm going to create this. I'm going to say, let's just call this current walls. And what we're going to do is we're going to click add, and then we will change this to, right, a list that's a game object list. And we should just be able to say 1, 2, 3, 4, right? This is what we want. So let's go ahead and if we hold down, right, if we click in our graph and then we hold down option, click, ooh, and click in the wrong place, hold down option, click and drag, we should be able to set this variable, right? So I'm going to go ahead and come over here, and this is just going to make our life so much easier. So I'm going to drop this in here, and then I'm going to connect the output of my final wall to this set variable. Okay. Right, so this is going to generate all of our walls, except it's not instantiating any of them yet. And that's what we're going to need to do next. So to instantiate these, let's go ahead and we're going to get our current walls. And we're going to be using, in order to get this all to function, we're going to need to use a for loop. And the one we're going to use specifically is for each. So I'm going to click add unit. I'm going to say for each. And what's nice about this is what you do is you give a list is your input. And so it basically already knows how long, right, your list is. It should be 4 units long in this case. And it's going to be able to just shoot an item out. And if we need to use the index, we can use the index. But what's nice about this is then instead of having 4 instantiates and all of this other stuff, I'm just going to have my item go here to the original. The parent is going to remain the same. And the body is going to come here and do the instantiating. And to get this to work, I'm just going to my flow is going to come from this set variable, and it's going to plug in here. Okay, so let's go ahead and populate our east, south, and west wall lists, and then we will see if this graph works. So I'm going to go ahead and go to object variables, and I'll make this a little bit larger. And I'm going to start with my east walls and just keep going. And I will speed this part up most likely. Remember to have the entry be the first item in the list. Otherwise, when we come, there's a step that we're going to need to take that we're just going to assume it's the first item in the list. And if we don't do that, it could be problematic. So that was east, and then south is next.
list, and list.
Okay, so I've got those set. So let's go ahead and see if we randomly generate walls in all four sides. Okay, so we have randomly generated walls that now there's an entry in the south and there's an entry in the east. Fantastic. Okay, so so we're at a really good spot. We're randomly generating walls. So now comes the tricky part of what happens when we hit one of these colliders and want to pass through. At this point, if I just move Bob around, right, this collider should prevent me from going through the entry, right? And, oftentimes, it really depends on what you're doing. If you're creating something where maybe Bob would need to clear the room of enemies before he was able to pass through these entries, then this is exactly what we want to have happen. Now, when Bob is hitting these colliders, right, what's happening is that I am getting those signals they're sending, right? But yeah, so we may not want Bob to be able to pass through these until some event has happened. And so right now I have these set as colliders, right? We may want to actually have some other object in here that's in the way and gets cleared out of the way, like a door that opens. And then you can go pass over the trigger, and the trigger will then trigger the new room to change. So we could do one more just to see where the walls generate this time, if there's any entries. Now, one of the issues is what happens if, there's a chance that all four of these walls will have no entries and we will be trapped. And so we're going to need to essentially check to see if there is an entry and then choose which side we always want the entry to be on, right? That's the simplest way to do it, is basically to say, okay, if there are no entries that have been generated in this room by the random generator, then do we always go to the east? Do we always go to the west? Do we always go south or north? That is, up to us. And I think we should probably, let's just say we'll go north no matter what. So let's go ahead and get that code written, and then we will start to work on the next steps. So I'm going to go to my game manager. I'm going to go to my flow graph. I'm going to double click, and where we need this to happen is between the creation of this list and the setting of this current, or actually really between the setting of this variable and the for loop here, right? Before we instantiate anything, we want to check and see if any walls have entries. Now, what we've done is we have tags on there, right, on the entry colliders themselves, but we don't have any tags on the walls yet. So let's go back to our project pane, and what we want to do is we want to select one wall to start with an entry, and right, it's untagged. Now I already have entry and wall as tags, so go ahead and add entry and wall as tags, and then we will come back, and once you've added those, which hopefully you've done now, you probably paused it, go ahead and select all of the entries and change the tag to entry, right? Because we don't care what entry we're at, or right, we don't care whether it's north, south, east, or west. All we want to know is there an entry or is there not an entry? And if there's not an entry, then let's go ahead and select the walls that are just walls, and we might as well just tag those with wall. All right, we may not ever need those tags. We may just need the entry tags, but we might as well do, we're doing it, we might as well do it right. Okay, so let's go to our game manager, go to our flow graph, and what we're going to do is we're essentially going to check through this list to see if there are any entries. And so we're going to use a for each. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it. And right, we're going to be using this, where we might as well just use the variable we created. So I'm going to copy this and paste it as well. And so we are going to come through here. We're going to drop this in as our list. And then in the body of the text, what we need to do, the items coming out of here are game objects. So we're going to need to do a compare tag. right? So I'm going to say game object compare tag. And the tag we want to check is entry. Now we're going to do something a little special here because no matter what, we're going to want to basically, if we find entry tags, right, then we're fine. We don't need to make any changes whatsoever. And in fact, the first time we find an entry tag, we can eject out of this loop because it doesn't matter. So what we're going to say is, right, if this is true, and we could break out of this loop after we, find one true state, but going through this loop 4 times, it's a tiny loop. Now, if this was a much larger and more complex thing, then absolutely we would want to use a unit called break loop that just basically kicks us out and does whatever the exit condition is. So if it's true, right, we could still just say, let's break the loop, right? So, and actually there's one thing we need to do. We're going to need a bool that we can set. So when we exit, if that bool ends up false, then we are which means we'd have no entries, then we'll generate an entry. And if the bool ends up true, then we will not generate a new entry. So let's go ahead, and this can be a graph variable, and we're just going to call this entry flag. And we're going to add this. We're going to click bool. We're going to leave the value as false to start with. And then we are going to say, so if this is true, I'm going to hold down Option, click and drag. I'm going to set my entry flag, and right, so if it finds an entry, if it's true, let's go ahead and just set our entry flag to true. So I'm going to say bool literal true, right? And so it may run through here and hit one tag that's entry and then hit another tag that's entry, right? It's just going to keep it set to true. And if it's false, we don't want to do anything. We're just checking to see if entry exists, right? And so in this case, right, we'll whip through those. It's only 4 iterations, so it's not the end of the world. If, like, we could potentially say true, and we could finish this off by saying, the smart thing to do, and I might as well show you how to do it, is to come over here and just type in break and break loop, right? So basically, we're only going to run through this as many iterations as we absolutely need before, because the first time we find this true, then we're good to go, right? If it's false, we just want to do the next iteration, so we don't do anything. So then the exit condition, we need to say, right, we need to check our variable. So before I attach that flow, we need to actually grab this entry flag variable, right? We need to get that, and we just need to check to see if that is true. So I'm going to bring this out, right? And I'm going to say, go down to logic, right? And we're basically going to say equals, and what we want it to be, if it equals false, but I'm going to go ahead and copy this bool literal, paste it over here, right? So I'm going to uncheck that. So it's, right, if this flag is false, then what do we want to do? If it's false, then we're going to feed a new element in here, right? So what we need to do is we need to do a branch. And that's where we can then connect our exit to our flow here. And I'm going to go ahead and delete that flow so I can just connect this so everything's live and it's easier to see. Right, so what we're going to do is we come through here, right? We're checking. Okay, so let's say there's actually no entries, right? There's nothing, that's all walls. So what it's going to do is it's going to exit and it's going to say, oh, there are no entries. So we need to create an entry. And so to create this entry, what we're going to do is we're going to add a unit that's going to be our collections, and it's going to be lists. And we're going to say set list item. Now, right, remember our north wall is 0, right? East is 1, south is 2, and west is 3. So we're going to be using 0, right? And the item that we want is we want to go ahead and go to our object variables, grab our north wall list. Oops, I don't know why that happens. Okay, grab our north wall list, and then we're going to right click, and we're going to come over here, and we're going to say collections, and we're going to say first item, right? Because we know that a first item of any one of our lists is a wall, or is an entry, sorry. So I'm going to put that in there. And what I need to do is I need to have the list that I want to be modifying. So I'm going to grab my current walls over here. And this is odd because usually you'd set this variable through a set thing, but we actually use the get to pull the list, and then we modify the item, and then we continue on with our day. So I'm just going to come over here, connect this. And so now, this section of the graph is our check to make sure that we have some exit. We've got to have at least one. And this is really only used the first time around, because once we're going to do some other work here where when we're generating a new set of walls, we're going to be using, if we're going from, say we're walking through the north exit, that's going to be the south entry to the next room. And so we're actually going to make sure that if that was the entry we went through, then we're definitely generating the entry on the south, on the south wall. So we're always going to have at least one no matter what after this. But initially we need to make sure that we don't box our player in, which would be hilarious, but they might be a little irritated with us for doing that. Okay, and so then what I can do is I can come over and reconnect this. Now this is getting a little nasty, but that's all right. So let's go ahead and just double check and make sure that this works, and that we're still generating rooms now. And I'm not going to go through and generate enough rooms to actually make sure that the code's all working, but why did I not get anything? Oh, I know why I didn't get anything. Okay, so something went wrong, but I didn't get an error. So what's the problem? If you look at this, one of the other nice things about Bolt is that it basically tells you where you got to by what objects are here, right? So if I zoom in a bit, it says, okay, north wall entry, true, false, true, true, false. And this says false, and then I don't have anything connected here, right? And so if it was true, it would have gone through. But if it's false, I still want to go to the next step. I just don't want to do all of this stuff. So the issue is that I should have brought this line up as well, right? So whether it's true or false, I need to connect to this next for loop, or else I'm not going to instantiate anything, right? Okay, so let's stop this. Let's make sure that that connection stayed. It did. And let's go ahead and play this again. All right, so in this case, there are 3 entries, so it wouldn't have triggered that additional code. But now we've got that check in there. And you can also see, that this current walls list is actually, throwing these different walls in, So everything's populating the way it's supposed to. All right, so let's go ahead and stop this. I'm going to double click. I'm going to come in here and I want to clean this up. I want to make this a little bit more legible, So, this whole big thing is list generation, but let's go ahead and say, let's separate these out into the walls that we're doing, So this group is going to be the west wall choose.
And then let's go ahead and pull that down just a touch, I'm going to hold down command. And so, we're just going to go ahead and make sure that we know what's going on here, because this is the south. And we could color these if we want to. I'm just going to try and work quickly here, but please color them, make your graph look nice and pretty. This is going to be the east wall choose. And then, we'll pull this up a little bit, because this ends up being, and I'm just going to snug this over a little bit, this ends up being our north wall choose. Now, we could replace this with a super unit, but I'm going to leave it the way it stands, just because then we have this one exposed that, if we forget what we did, we don't have to go into the super unit to look for it. So north wall choose. Okay, so we've got those. So then let's go ahead and we have this code all set up in here. And then we're going to write our variables. And so let's go ahead and say this next group, we could probably say, let's go ahead and make this generate wall list, which is right here. And then this loop here, all of this nightmarish stuff here, let's go ahead and we're just going to, I'm going to undo that because I missed this last thing. And this is a little bit ugly, but this is going to be, right, this is our, right, this is our has at least one entry check. And I'm calling them entries, but right, exits entries, same thing. And then finally, right, instantiate walls.
Okay, so great. So we've cleaned that up a bit. We have, you know, everything laid out so we know what's happening at this point. This is a really good point to take a break in our tutorial. And in the next section, we will go forward and we're going to go ahead and look at how to then continue to instantiate new rooms with all of these walls and make sure that we basically have the correct opening where we need it. Okay.